I'm Mark Golub, and front and center in the news remains the continuing arguments within the Jewish community over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's planned address to a joint session of Congress at the beginning of March. As I'm sure you well know, there are Jews arguing in support of the Prime Minister's address, and there are Jews arguing against it. And those arguing against it are warning that the Israeli Prime Minister is doing enormous damage to the U.S.-Israeli relationship, to the traditionally solid bipartisan congressional support of Israel, and may make a positive deal with Iran over its nuclear program less likely. Well, members of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations have been in Israel, hearing from major Israeli leaders, especially as Israel prepares for its own elections toward the middle of March, including remarks from Prime Minister Netanyahu, who explained why he feels it is his duty as Israel's Prime Minister to do all he can to prevent the U.S. and P5+2 from making a bad deal with Iran. And from people like the chairman of the Zionist Camp Party, Isaac Herzog, who claims that Mr. Netanyahu is a failed prime minister and is harming Israel's interests in the United States and around the world. Well, to give us a sense of what it's been like to be in attendance at these various encounters with the prime minister and other Israeli political leaders, I'm so pleased to have once again on our phones from Jerusalem the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, thank you again for joining us.
It's always my pleasure to talk to you and to bring you greetings from the eternal capital of the Jewish people.
Yes. Give us a sense of what it's been like to be with the Conference of Presidents on this trip and to hear people like Netanyahu and Herzog and just the feel and what's going on.
It's a really good question. Every year the Conference of Presidents visits Israel in February, and the technical reasons why the date is when it is, it has to do with other meetings here, and we have more than 100 people in our delegation, which first visited Bratislava, Slovakia, and in Vienna, Austria, where we met in both places with presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, but most importantly with the International Atomic Energy Agency about Iran. We had 3 meetings there, and we had several meetings at the OSCE, which deals with anti-Semitism and racism, and we also met with some of the UN terrorism organizations, all of which was really very informative, very positive, and we were able to communicate our message. Coming here, as I said, we do every February, and every time there is a crisis of one kind or another, external or internal.
Yes.
And because they have elections every 2.5 years, so the likelihood is, as one pundit put it in his address to us, every 2 years we're either in an election or fighting a war. So we keep things interesting. Mm-hmm. It is true that right now, because of the election, every issue is even more divisive and more highlighted. And the media, of course, as they do in America, except for your show, exploits these issues because it keeps things interesting. The Prime Minister spoke the other night. We've had all the leaders of Israel and have seen some amazing things here. And we had the leader of the opposition, both Bibi Herzog and Tzipi Livni, today. And they focused on the issue of the relationship with the United States, as did many others. Clearly, it's a top priority.
Yes.
Nobody in any part of the spectrum wants to see a deterioration in the relationship. There's far too much that is of vital importance to both countries. There always have been dips and hills and ups and downs in the relationship, as there is with between any 2 countries. But they're particularly sensitive when it comes to Israel. You remember with Reagan, we had AWACS, and Bitburg, and other things. Every president, and the chemistry issues and all the things that people speculate about play a role. But here you're dealing with an issue of such vital significance.
Namely?
Seen in Israel as an existential issue.
You're talking about Iran.
Iran.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of Israelis in the polls support Netanyahu going. They clearly are also extremely supportive of the United States, probably the highest numbers anywhere in the world. And President Obama's ratings are not that high here. But they don't want to see it get personal. They don't want to see it focus on anything but the substance. So it is widely debated about should he go, not go, how it came about. Clearly there were mistakes made, but the Prime Minister sees this as an imperative because of the seriousness and because we're coming close to the deadline for the negotiations, and that the word he says he has and the information he has is that they're headed towards a bad deal.
Yes.
One that will enshrine that Iran's capacity to enrich, and that so many loopholes are left. And the administration has responded in various ways, including saying that they're not going to share information. U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, today told us it's not so. They are sharing all the information. But what is bottom line is that America and Israel want the same thing. They want to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power and nuclear weapons power. And Israel cannot tolerate it when Khamenei continues to talk about wiping Israel off the map. There are many who feel, that the administration, the president, has sought to have a breakthrough like he had with Havana in Tehran, with a country that is eating up more and more of the Middle East. Others say that the administration is fighting along with the Europeans to get a deal that would prevent Iran from and would have a breakout period to prevent it from being able to move quickly. And the breakout period is not really relevant, I believe. What is relevant is what capacity they're left with. And that, I think, has not yet been determined.
Okay. Malcolm, how much disagreement is there among the members of the Conference of Presidents on the question of whether Mr. Netanyahu should be addressing a joint session of Congress or not?
As we represent a broad spectrum of views, I'm sure there are a broad spectrum within the conference. But frankly, I have to say that in these discussions, people haven't tried to politicize or weren't taking sides so much as trying to probe the issues. And we gave them, the broadest spectrum possible and the biggest depth possible, with everybody from the head of military intelligence and the head of the IDF, the General Gantz, who just is leaving as chair of the IDF, that, you see the issues are overwhelming, whether it's ISIS and events in the north, Iran taking over in Iraq and in Syria and Lebanon and Yemen, the growth of anti-Semitism, the challenges that are posed by Hezbollah's upgrading and the more visible role of Iran right on along the Golan border, a big issue, certainly what happens in the territories. And there are just so many issues. So there was no real division, although there are a variety of viewpoints on it.
There is. Okay. Do you think members of the Conference of Presidents were sympathetic to Isaac Herzog's criticism of Mr. Netanyahu? And the basic criticism, Malcolm, is that somehow bipartisan support of Israel in Congress has been damaged by Mr. Netanyahu's accepting Speaker Boehner's invitation. I have a twofold question for you. I want to know, number one, to what extent do you feel that's true? Do you feel there has been any bipartisan erosion of support for the State of Israel? And in general, were there members of the Conference of Presidents listening to Isaac Herzog who, basically are saying, yes, the Prime Minister you used the word a mistake a moment ago, made a serious mistake in accepting this invitation?
I did not say that Prime Minister. I said there were mistakes made on both sides. There were people sympathetic to Herzog's criticism, just as there were many who were supportive of the Prime Minister's address, explaining why he's going to Washington, why now, why has he chose to go now, and why the Congress. And he gave a very succinct statement about those things, and Herzog gave a sharp criticism. Nobody wants to see Israel be a partisan issue, and nothing should be done that would lead to that. I don't believe that there is a sharp cleavage between Republicans and Democrats now. We've seen erosion on the Democratic side in support for Israel, something we've worked hard to correct and bolster. But it would be terrible to see an issue of this importance become subject to any kind of partisan divide. We need everybody's votes in support of sanctions. We need everybody's support of a really tough deal or to hold Iran accountable. And so you can't, I guess it's really going to be hard to judge this until we see what happens about who was right and who was wrong. Maybe the Speaker should have notified the White House. Maybe the White House knew and shouldn't have jumped publicly on some of the, in the reaction. I think that what's important and what to me is dangerous is that the focus is off of Iran, and Iran is moving constantly in every realm. When we met with the officials who are in charge of inspections and stuff, and they tell us, look, we know about the places they have, and we have limited access. But the real danger is the places that we don't know, that Iran is known to cheat, and Iran is known to have clandestine facilities. And anything that would, if you see how aggressive Iran has been, that they took over Yemen and they're trying to take over the Sudan in addition to the other countries, and Khamenei boasts about the fact that it's the first time in history Shiites control 4 Arab capitals. And if you add to that a nuclear capacity, just think of the threat that would pose. And frankly, having met Arab leaders in the last couple of weeks, they are more apoplectic. They say, look, Israel can defend itself. We can't. Mm-hmm. And in the region, in the broader region, because Iran's capacity with its development of ballistic missiles and the weaponization program gives it the capacity to deliver those weapons from Europe to Central Asia to many places. And those countries, believe me, are more worried or as worried as Israel.
You know, my own sense is that there is no question that the Iranian issue and whether Iran reaches a nuclear weapons threshold, and that threshold means that within a certain period of time, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, a year, it can go nuclear. That's a very serious issue, one that everyone who can speak about this intelligently should be speaking. And what I've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu say is being able to address this from the podium of the United States Congress gives me a platform to make a point and to try to be persuasive, not simply in terms of American foreign policy and the American administration, but also the world is going to be watching. And therefore, he argues that as Israeli Prime Minister, and this has been his, this has been something he has been warning the world about now. I don't know, as long as I've been doing, Shalom TV, JBS, we've been covering this. So it's what, since 2006, 2007, it's been a long time, and all we seem to be doing is getting closer and closer. And my point is this to you, Malcolm, that yes, that is the most important issue. At the same time, what has happened is there is a legitimate issue been created over whether in some way this address by the Prime Minister is counterproductive. And I'm now telling you that from my perspective, I am not persuaded it is. I am not persuaded that because the Prime Minister is going to speak to a joint session of Congress and that somehow he may speak in opposition to the American administration, that Democratic members of Congress are going to withdraw their bipartisan support of Israel. I find that to be a red herring, a political argument being used by those who are, supportive of the president and don't want the Prime Minister to say anything that will in some way get in the way of American administration policy. And that's why, although I wish we would be talking about Iran, I told you that's not why I'm calling you. I'm calling you because I do want your sense of how this issue is playing out. And are you in some way critical of the Prime Minister? Is the President's conference critical? And, American Jewish Committee, which normally is in the forefront of every Jewish issue, refuses now to take a public stand. I find that dramatic, Malcolm. We have Rick Jacobs, head of the Union for Reform Judaism, being very critical of Mr. Netanyahu for taking the stand and being willing to speak to Congress. And he's a member of the Conference of Presidents. So I'm looking to you, number one, you're in Israel hearing what the Israelis are saying, but I'm also looking to you for any sense of guidance or perspective you can bring on this part of the issue, which is, you know, I talked to Ken Jacobson of the ADL. Ken Jacobson says to me, the Prime Minister made a mistake by not being sure he was receiving an invitation that represented bipartisan support. But, Ken Jacobson of the ADL says, now that the Prime Minister is coming, all of American Jewry should be behind the Prime Minister. I want to know what you would say to the American people and the American Jewish community listening to you right now on JBS. What should our attitude be about this very sensitive issue as it has developed?
Look, I think this will be examined for many years about all the dynamics, who did what to whom and how it came about. That's why I said before that there are things that have happened and been attributed to people on both sides, and yet much of it is speculation. So let me take several points. One, this is a unique opportunity to have the platform of the Congress to present an issue that he has been, as you noted, consistently arguing. He did it at the United Nations with that drawing of the, and people cite it all the time. Whether the 20% enrichment was a smart, is in fact the measure that we should be judging by, when today the 20% enrichment is not really significant. But you notice that Iran never passed the red line that the Prime Minister said at that speech. So it is very important that the message be communicated and that Iran not be allowed to engage in the kind of obfuscation. We know that they have cheated in the past, and we know that they are likely to cheat in the future. How many safeguards are being put in? How many centrifuges are they going to be allowed to have? And that the dismantling or the gasification of the 20% enriched uranium, when it can be reversed, how are all of these safeguards going to be put in place? And as somebody said to me, which had a profound impact on my thinking a couple of weeks ago, he said if Winston Churchill had been given the chance to go before the Congress of the United States in 1938 or 39 to warn of the danger and to unify the American people and to get them involved in fighting Nazism, and the President, Roosevelt, would have objected, would he not still have had the obligation to go if he, seeing it as kind of existential danger? I think it would be very regrettable, but I don't think that the reality is that this will make Israel a partisan issue. Those who want to exploit it can. Mm-hmm. But the common interests between the two countries are so overwhelming and so great, and we can't allow people to exploit it and to divide it. I think what you just quoted, Özbang, that the fact that he's coming now, people should get behind it. I hope that Democrats will show up, will listen, hear his message, see what he has to say. This is not just a peripheral issue. It's not a political issue. The partisanship, the divisions, it's very unfortunate. This is a time when we need unity. We need everybody, all of the Jewish community united. We need Democrats and Republicans to stand behind. We're seeing vital interests of America, of the world, being jeopardized every day because of the lack of assertiveness, the lack of the perception that America and the West don't have the will and determination, that we are succumbing to the wiles of Khomeini and Rouhani, who are such skilled bazaris for thousands of years of training. Read Rouhani's book about the years he spent as the chief negotiator, where he says, I lied, I obfuscated, and mocks his interlocutors. What reason do we have to believe them now? So there has to be such an ironclad deal. There has to be something that says we will not tolerate it. We will not allow the countries like Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. We don't want to see an arms race, a nuclear arms race. We don't want to see America's vital interests sabotaged when you have the chief sponsor of world terrorism, the chief sponsor of Hezbollah, Hamas, a country that is trying to undermine regimes that are pro-Western, and then to say that we in any way will be responsible for them having a nuclear weapons capacity. That's the real issue. And I think All the other things are sideshows, and there will be a lot of analysis, a lot of criticisms, a lot of, back and forth between people over the issue. But right now, Congress voted overwhelmingly for the sanctions, and the administration has asserted time and again that it was the sanctions that brought Iran to the table, and only a definitive stand that tells them, if you do not come to the table, number one, we are going to hit you with very hard sanctions. Mm-hmm. Number two, the military option is a serious option, one we don't want to exercise. But when you know the nature of the regime you're dealing with, and you see how fundamental values have been degraded, that beheadings become the major recruitment tool in the region, and when you see that countries like Iran can back terrorist organizations, that Turkey can engage in the kind of rhetoric against Israel, against Jews, Prime Minister, a member of NATO, and there's no price. When we see the rampant anti-Semitism and racism that is in Europe today, and there's no real change taking place, it's time that people have to stand up, and we can't allow ourselves to be diverted by secondary issues.
I want to ask one more. It's a difficult question, and again, I recognize that you, first of all, you represent the Conference of Presidents, so there's this spectrum of opinion inside the conference, and it's difficult for you to sort of speak in one voice when there are many voices in the conference. So you can tell me that my question isn't easy for you to answer. But I am concerned, given the importance of the Iranian nuclear potential and the threat it would pose to Arab countries, to Saudi Arabia, to the region. It might create an arms race throughout the Middle East. There are those who also worry that Iran might be just crazy enough to use it against Israel. Netanyahu keeps talking about interballistic missiles, which are only built to deliver nuclear weapons across an ocean. Now we're talking about the United States. Given the degree of importance here, you talk about Churchill, I'm surprised that I have not heard American Jewish leaders say something soft but clear like this, Malcolm. I'm disappointed in the administration and the position it seems to be taking in opposition to and criticism of the Israeli Prime Minister coming to address a joint session of Congress. I have not seen any. By the way, there are people who are, yelling and screaming, and Mort Klein screaming from the ZOA's position, and there are other organizations which are very supportive of the Prime Minister, and they criticize the administration somehow in very harsh terms. But I'm saying somebody should be saying gently, I'm disappointed that there is any suggestion in the administration from the White House that they're critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu coming to the Congress of the United States and addressing what may be the most serious issue confronting international peace in our times. And so, I've put that out to you. I'll take any response you want to give me.
Well, I don't think that's a question. I think it's an answer, first of all. Second of all, I agree completely. We don't need people to raise the rhetoric. I think the rush to criticism or the harshness of some of the tones that we've heard are not helpful in this discussion. But I think that I made it very clear about what's at stake, what has to be done, and that the Prime Minister is coming. Now is the time to stand behind him. And all the other issues, the question of the propriety of the process and all of that, is something that can be discussed and debated, and people can be held to account on both sides. I think it is unfortunate, and I mentioned that some of the characterizations and some of the words that were used before, you remember the chicken comment and the other comments that have come forward, and sometimes we hear things that are read from Israel. What is of concern also is the lack of confidence when they talk about withholding information. This is not a time when you can withhold information. This is a time when there has to be a real sharing and a willingness to assess things in the limelight, there can't be hidden aspects to a discussion. at this time on this issue. It has to be exposed, and therefore that's the Prime Minister's thinking in wanting to come to Washington to lay it all out. And I hope he's going to have a convincing speech. If he doesn't, it'll have ramifications too. But I think he's going to have to come and make a case to the members of Congress, to the American people, to the administration.
Malcolm, I always love talking to you. You always have so much to share with our audience. You know I will turn to you time and time again. I love you dearly. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the time in Israel. When you're back in the States, we'll meet. And kol tuv v'hatzlacha for all you do, and mazal tov. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
You be well. Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. As always, I invite you to share your own response to anything you heard Malcolm say or anything that I've said. Again, it seems to me that given the importance of this issue, it should never have been politicized the way it has been. And I'm taken aback that there would be any Democrat who would say they don't want to listen to what the Prime Minister of Israel has to say on the issue of the Iranian nuclear threshold threat. That any Democrat would say, I don't want to hear it, because in some way it undermines my support of President Obama. I don't think it should undermine anybody's support of President Obama. And if Israel has a view different than the administration's, they're all big boys, and they can hear it. And again, it seems to me that somebody should be saying, Democrats should be saying, we're disappointed. This didn't have to be an issue. And this is not the first time that Prime Minister Netanyahu will speak to a joint session of Congress. And the last time he did it, he got, a rousing response. And we heard, there seems to be less than good blood. I don't know if it's bad blood between the Obama administration and Netanyahu, and between President Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay. It's not the first time. It will not be the last time. There's a difference of opinion between an American president and an Israeli prime minister. This is not the nadir of Israeli-U.S. relationships. Believe me, if you have any sense of history, you know there have been much, much worse conflicts between American presidents and Israeli prime ministers. But here is an issue of paramount importance to the United States, to the world. And if the man who has championed this cause for what? A decade and more wants to come to the United States and speak from the platform of the Congress of the United States, and he will have a world platform from there. And yes, he may say something that would affect American policy. Then I would like the American administration, I'd like every member of Congress, Democrat and Republican, to be there and to either say, he made some good points, as Malcolm hopes the Prime Minister does, or we disagree with him. So to me, the question of the response to Prime Minister Netanyahu's coming here is very important. It says worlds about so many aspects, not simply of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, but about how the United States wants to conduct foreign policy in general, and how it wants to conduct foreign policy vis-a-vis Iran and its nuclear aspirations. Again, please be in touch with me with any thoughts you may have about either things that Malcolm Hoenlein have said or anything I have said. I always love to hear from you. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. My thanks to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Dara Golub, and our producer of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.